I Want to Jump Like Dee Dee, with me, Giles Sibbald, is the music podcast that does music a bit differently. I'm talking to some incredible musicians, DJs and producers about how they use an experimental mindset to fuel their own creativity, pursue new challenges, overcome fears, bounce back from mistakes. Some of the most important and difficult skills and attributes that we can learn are really sort of, I think, sort of wrapped up in our emotional intelligence or EQ. And I'm like a really big believer that having a high EQ can be, if not more important, and certainly as important as IQ. And I think it's so often overlooked, especially in kids where, you know, early learning is of these sort of skills is so important, almost exclusively in favor of traditional learning programs. And it kind of makes you think, you know, why are we taught, you know, how to measure the sort of cube root of 743 tins of sliced peaches, but not about how to be nice to people. I mean, I'm kind of exaggerating, but you sort of get the picture, you know. My guest today has talked about the way that they have handled and grown their own self-awareness and empathy, and I'm so excited to talk to them more about this, their mindset, identity, activism, building a better world, and anything else that really sort of comes on the table. So it's a real honor to welcome Sarah Shook to the show. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Sorry, I jumped the gun on the intro there. I just got really excited about what you were talking about.
I hope it sort of makes. I mean, you know, sort of no disrespect to sort of other publications who are much more expert in talking about, you know, sort of chord changes and things like that. But this is sort of clearly about sort of mindset. So I just love the idea of emotional intelligence and, you know, sort of things like that. I just think it's so kind of important.
I do too. I think that's something that the world would benefit greatly from if it was more of a point of focus in the earlier developmental years.
Yeah. I remember talking to it was a few years ago that I got I can't remember how it happened, but I got introduced to she's a pediatrician in Nebraska, and she was just like so much about, you know, basically like the earlier that you can sort of start, you know, talking about you know, emotional intelligence, so, you know, things like self-awareness and empathy, you know, in kids the earlier. Now obviously it's like a sort of huge change, but you know, she was like a big supporter, and this is something that she's sort of been, you know, taking to, you know, various sort of, you know, education boards around the US. But it's a big issue, right?
Yeah, for sure. I have a 15-year-old, so I got to spend the first 10 months after he was born at home with him.
Yeah.
And we've always been close, and he's always been a bit of an old soul, and I attribute that a lot to spending time listening to him, which I think is kind of an issue for a lot of parents, is we don't know that we're supposed to listen to our kids. We just figure we're the grown up, we're in charge, they're just supposed to do what I say. And when they do, everything's nice and easy. And when they don't, they're being problematic. And, you know, anytime a child is acting out, it's an opportunity to teach them how to communicate more effectively. And teaching kids how to have responses that are commensurate with what the issue is, you know. So it's one thing if you you know, drop your ice cream cone, and it's another thing if a friend is moving far away and you're not going to see them anymore. Just teaching kids how to deal with these things and acknowledge their emotions. And you know what I mean, like figure out what is an appropriate size reaction.
I think as well, I mean you know the world, I mean, if I sort of think back to, you know, my parents, the world that they sort of grew up in lots of ways was simpler. I'm not saying always, but in lots of ways it was sort of simpler. I suppose a bit more sort of linear, you know, in how things happened. And it's more, maybe it's just more the sort of the traditional sort of mindset. But
the world sort of seemed a bit easy, but now it's so sort of complex and sort of uncertain, and kind of volatile that you need these sort of, I think you just, because of those sort of things, because of technology as well, you sort of need these sort of skills to, kind of work your way through the world. I just think it's really important.
Yeah, I feel the generations that came before us, there was more of an air of simplicity, but I feel like it's kind of a false, it's not really a good thing, in my opinion. I feel like things felt simpler because kids were taught to repress their emotions and just do what they were told.
Yeah.
So in a way, if you have this sort of authoritarian, strict enforcement of the rules, things are going to be easier on a surface level. But what happens is you end up with a bunch of people who are adults now, and they don't know how to regulate their emotions.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I remember. I mean, if we may, sort of talk about your upbringing. But just before, I mean, just on the point you just made, if I relate it to, to sort of my parents, like take my mum for example, she was brought. I mean, she's now 88 years old, and she was sort of brought up on a working farm. And was really in following with her mum, was brought up to this is sort of what you do. You are almost like sort of put on this planet to work and to put everybody else before yourself. And that she carried that on through her life. And at some stage it sort of comes back full circle. Yeah, I think, certainly in sort of my experience, and in things that she's perhaps done, the way that she's sort of behaved, and it's I just think you're right, that kind of traditional approach of she was taught to kind of repress things. This is how she should behave, and that then gets sort of passed on because that's what you've learned.
Yeah, I grew up in a very strict, conservative, evangelical Christian household, with some very extreme views. Very patriarchal. We were taught at a young age. I have 2 siblings, and we were taught that since we were born female, that our role, like the entire purpose for our existence, was to be a wife and a mother and a housekeeper. And furthermore, we weren't going to be allowed to choose our own husbands. Our dad was going to choose our husbands.
Wow.
So very extreme. And I know to like a lot of your listeners that does sound extreme, but unfortunately it's a lot more common here in the States than a lot of people think. And I think that that's a big part of why we're facing some of the political issues that we are now, because people constantly underestimate how involved in politics evangelical Christians are. But yeah, I was definitely raised to repress my emotions. And I would take it a step further and say to repress myself. And a big part of the religious aspect of our upbringing, like we weren't a family that goes to church every Sunday, like which we did go to church every Sunday, but we read our Bibles every day. We had family prayer time. We had, like, it was very, very involved. And like the overarching message was that we needed God because there's something wrong with us. So that's one of the core beliefs in my life that I've had to really attack and go after, is that there's nothing wrong with me, because that belief has just been like beaten into my brain from like a young age. And the entire concept of, I must become less like myself so I can become more like God. And that for some people, maybe that's a healthy thing. For me, it just, as a very strong-willed person with a very involved sense of self, like it was very damaging to my psyche, like very, very psychologically damaging.
Where do you think your kind of strength of will, and sort of, strong personality came from? Is that something that you inherited from your parents, or is this something that, with people that you grew up with, that their influence was sort of coming into you as well?
Yeah, no, it was, we were homeschooled all the way through. We never went to traditional school. And we did have, we got some socialization at church and at homeschool group. But according to my mom, I was the angriest baby she'd ever seen in her life. And she's like, you were basically born screaming. You just screamed your head off for like weeks. And it wasn't a scared screaming. It was a like, I don't want to be here screaming. So I've been something of a little hardship since I was little.
Fist lobbing down, I do not want to be here. And if I'm going to be here, it's going to be done my way.
That's right. Oh my God, exactly.
So can you recall at sort of what stage the those beliefs that have been sort of put into you started to feel that this is not who I am, and I really disagree with this? Was that a kind of like an evolution over time?
I mean, as a young child, I didn't know anything else. You know what I mean? Being isolated and being in that world, you don't understand that there are other philosophies, religions, and ways to live your life that have nothing to do with religion, if that's what's better for you. I started struggling with depression, when I was very, very little. And depression and anxiety and a lot of self-hatred around 10 and 11 that lasted for a long time. Self-harm. I felt like I didn't have any control over my life because I wasn't allowed to have control over my life. And I'm not gonna I want to clarify that my parents are wonderful people, and they were honestly doing the best that they could with what they had at the time. And there were a lot of good memories too. Like one of the things I love about my family is like we've always been there's always been good aspects of the family life as well. But I really started bristling under my dad's authority in my mid-teens, and I was just like, I don't want to grow up and like just be somebody's wife and like a housekeeper and marry somebody that I don't even get a say. Like that just like how can anyone think that sounds like a good idea for their life? Like what? So we started butting heads a lot in my mid to late teens.
I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? You mentioned that. I completely empathize with that sort of position where you have your parents or people that you sort of respect and love and admire for many things that they do for you as you're growing up. And I had that with my parents and my dad. But there are some things that even now at my ripe old age that I sort of look back to and think about. And those are the things that sort of stick with me, like say for example, I think I was probably about 8 years old or so, and I've been playing with my friends in the field at the back of my mum and dad's old house, and we were playing football, and I sort of brought my ball in, because I wanted to go in, and one of my friends went and told his mum that I'd basically told him to fuck off. Right, and I hadn't, and his mum sort of comes across, tells my dad. I get the call to go upstairs, and see him and stuff. And I explained my position, but basically he believed somebody else over me. And that years later, still, and I only started to piece this together sort of in the last sort of few years, about why I sort of have some issues around trust. because my dad just basically didn't trust my word. And it's weird, isn't it? How you can have like sort of strong and really good relationships, but then these other things are the things that you then carry through your life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And being a parent too, it's always in the back of my mind. No matter how hard I try to do this job, at some point I'm going to do something that's like that fucks with my kid's head. And I've talked to him about this and just said, look, if I ever do or say anything that hits you a certain way, and like it causes you to have a feeling that you're not comfortable with, like, please come tell me and let's talk about it right then. And try
absolutely.
to and I was like, because I'm not perfect and I am going to make mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes as long as your heart is like, when you realize that like something needs to be repaired, you work to repair it.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think in lots of ways what you've experienced yourself, you've clearly sort of you've learned from that, and that's what you're then sort of taking forward in the relationship with your son as well. So there are, I guess, kind of positives. But then you think about the sort of the impact of this in terms of sort of generations, about how long it can potentially sort of take to for this way of living can take to get away from this sort of traditional thing that doesn't really work. It doesn't work anymore.
Absolutely. Both of my parents had their respective experiences with their parents. My grandparents were very, very unhealthy. My mom's experience in particular was just the stuff of nightmares. She was horribly abused by her parents. She just wrote a book about it and released it, I think it was last year.
Wow.
But I look at that and I think about that entire concept of generational trauma and breaking these cycles that we find ourselves in. And my mom would never consider anything about our upbringing abusive because we weren't like physically abused. But you know what I mean? But
Absolutely.
For me, just the way that religion was put upon us, and we were made to feel we were nothing without God, and that we were deeply flawed on the most fundamental level. Like those things were incredibly damaging. And like on the flip side, when we're talking to kids and we're approaching kids, things like self-esteem, teaching kids what self-esteem and self-awareness are, can in the future be life-saving. Those can be tools that end up being something that literally saves somebody's life, because someone took the time to say, like, this is how you process these things, and this is how you approach these things. And when you feel this way, you're not going to feel this way forever. You know what I mean?
When you were sort of becoming aware, were you pretty much on your own in sort of dealing with these sort of issues that you were feeling?
Yeah, my family moved around a few times when I was growing up, and we ended up back. This is the second time we'd moved to North Carolina, and we ended up back here when I was 19. And things were escalating really quickly between me and my dad. We were just constantly knocking heads. And it was getting really intense. And I think we moved to North Carolina in July of 2005. And in December, I met a guy on the internet and married him 3 weeks later, and got pregnant with my son 2 months later. And my friend Erica calls it an escape marriage, and it was. I was still young, and I thought I was in love with this dude that I didn't know at all. But it was so symbolic to be like, the entire way that I was raised, it's like, your sole purpose in life is to be a wife, mother, and housekeeper, and I get to pick your husband. So for me to just marry some random dude I met on the internet 3 weeks after I met him was like the ultimate fuck you to my dad. It was like, immediate boundaries, like inarguable. Yeah. I'm leaving your house. I'm going to be with someone you haven't approved. And like, I am my own person. Like you can't have the access to me that you had before.
Yeah. With as far as music goes, music, what sort of role did that play in your life, and how did it become, you know, such a big part of who you are now?
Me and my siblings were not allowed to listen to anything growing up, except for classical music and worship music. So we weren't even allowed to listen to contemporary Christian bands that all of my peers at church were listening to. So very, very, very specific kinds of music that we were exposed to. And I got my first job when I was 17 or 18, and all of my coworkers, I was working as a cashier at a grocery, and all of my coworkers were high school kids that all went to school together. So I was kind of like, it was like being the new kid. And I was also homeschooled, so I was like a freak. So everybody was just like, you know, tell us about like your life. You're so weird. And I'm like, yes, it's all weird.
Tell me something I don't know. I know.
I'm painfully aware that I'm the freak here. And yeah, they realized that I had no idea about any of the bands that were huge at that time, or like even just like in that little circle of friends. So they started slipping me CDs to take home.
Wow.
And I would smuggle them into my room, and I would wait until my parents went to sleep, and then I would just lay under my covers with my headphones on. And I will never forget that set of emotions, just hearing real music for the first time. It was absolutely unbelievable. My dad was really like, what's crazy is before my dad had his salvation experience, he was a musician. He was the lead guitarist in several rock and roll bands that
Wow.
Yeah. And then when he got saved, he felt like God told him to like put music down.
Wow.
So my dad's always had this like sort of strange relationship with music since then. And he just got it in his head that music with like a lot of heavy bass and drums was like satanic. And you know, mind you, in the US at the time, like in the 80s and 90s, like the satanic panic was like pretty full force among evangelical Christians. So it made sense for the time. But yeah, listening to bands like the Gorillaz when you're 17 and you've only listened to like Vivaldi.
What is this? What's happening to me?
And I mean, I wrote my first song when I was 8 or 9, and my family had this very old and neglected upright piano in the main hallway in our house. And I taught myself just from ear, like what notes sound good together and what doesn't sound good together. And I had no language for it. I didn't know what a chord was. I didn't know what a note was. So everything was just like up here in my head. And, you know, being 8 or 9 and in that environment, I'm sure that, you know, my first several songs were religious or about playing outside or, you know, climbing trees, which was also a very big part of my life.
Big part of your life as well,
yeah. Kids these days need to climb more trees, Giles.
They do, absolutely right. Absolutely right. Building dens and going hiding and stuff like that, and getting the bruises and the cuts and all. Yeah. Totally.
Yep. Snow forts.
Yeah.
Snow forts. Yep. But 16 years old, I taught myself to play guitar because I've always loved to spend time outside. And I was like, I'm really getting into this songwriting thing. And if I could combine songwriting and being outside, which are like my two favorite things. Yeah. And I can't lug the piano outside. I need a more portable instrument. Yeah. So I taught myself guitar. And in my early 20s, after my family moved to North Carolina, I got married, I had a kid, I got divorced. I was a single mother at 22. Working 3 jobs to try to, you know, provide for my kid. I started dating somebody new, and he had a record player, which I had never seen in person before. And he had a modest, like a small, but like really quality record collection of like old country greats.
Yeah.
And, you know, George Jones, Wanda Jackson, Charlie Pride, Katie Wells. And so we were sitting on the porch one day, and which is very common in the South. We call it porching. And we were porching one day, and he put on a Johnny Cash record. And I was like, what is this? And he's like, this is like country music. And I was like, this is the kind of songs that I've been writing. This is like the sort of 1-4-5 and the strum pattern. And I was just like, I've been doing this. And I was like, it's called country. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, okay. So that it has a name. It's a thing. And I mean, the only thing I can figure is, you know, maybe at a church service one time, somebody played a hymn in a country. I don't know. Yeah. I've been doing country for a while before I heard it, and it was very exciting and validating to be like, wow, this is actually a thing.
It's interesting that you were self-taught. You know, you basically sort of taught yourself the the instruments. And I mean, I was sort of classically trained, actually, and it's and talking about impractical instruments. I was sort of classically trained in the cello, so I was sort of carrying this big. You know, when you're a kid and you just sort of want to be, kind of inconspicuous, carrying this big thing around, on my back. I can see that. I thought I got away with that.
Think small thoughts.
And it's funny that a few years ago, having learned absolutely nothing about my experiences when I was a kid, I started playing drums. So going from impractical to even more impractical, sort of by the by. But it's interesting that you were self-learned as well, because about how that I think, or do you feel that because you don't know the inverted commas rules of music, that sort of lends itself to more of a kind of open-minded approach to how you what influences you have, and how you kind of create your songs?
I believe so. I a pianist, and I never set out to be a great guitarist. The instrument was always, this is just a vehicle to flesh out a song that I'm writing.
Yeah.
So for me, writing the song has always been the main, like, that is what that's everything. Writing a beautiful song, writing a powerful song, that is to me the most satisfying feeling in the world. And that's when I feel the most like myself, when I sit down and write a song and it's done and I'm just like, this is going to be awesome when the Disarmers get of it.
Absolutely.
That is just so fulfilling. And there are times when I'll bring a song to the Disarmers, and Eric Peterson, my guitarist, will be listening to what I'm doing. He's just like, that's like, it's a little bit dissonant. Like, it's not totally straightforward. And I'm like, yeah, I know.
That's what like you want. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. Yeah, totally. So somebody like Johnny Cash has obviously got a huge role, played a huge role in you now, in your music.
Yeah. That first day that I heard Johnny Cash, one of the songs on that record was his rendition of Long Black Veil. And I remember that being the first time that I had played music with someone else. Because my ex played upright bass.
Yeah. Okay.
And he was like, well, if you want, like, we could just sit on the porch here and like just write down the lyrics and we'll figure out what the chords are. And that was the first time that I had ever played with another musician. And it was great. It opened the door, certainly in my mind, of like, wow, this changes everything. Like this takes a song that can be beautiful in a simple form with one person and a guitar, and it just blows it wide open. Like the possibilities become multiplied. And then we started talking about maybe booking some gigs, and we got Phil Sullivan on. He did not know how to play pedal steel at the time. He only knew how to play lap steel, but we brought him on board, and then eventually we brought Eric Peterson on board, and we started playing all these shows, and I was doing all of the booking, and I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what a good deal was and what a bad deal was, but I'm grateful that I had that opportunity, because it gives me a lot of sympathy for our booking agent.
There you go. There's your empathy right away. There it is. Totally.
From learned experience.
From learned experience, I understand. I feel, It's funny, like what a very good friend of mine. He's hugely into Johnny Cash, and he says that Johnny Cash is sort of one of the few singers that can make him cry, and my sort of equivalent, and I see sounds of him in what you're doing, and I was really pleased that you sort of mentioned that about that dissonance. When you take a song to the Disarmers, you see that dissonance. And the one that does it for me is Mike Ness. Because I kind of see the in the music that he sort of produces, either sort of solo or with Social Distortion. The kind of like the country, the rock and roll, the punk. There's a blend of things going on, and with your latest record, absolutely, Nightroamer for sure, absolutely. It feels like a natural sort of evolution, or an evolution of what you've been doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. There were 2 songs on Nightroamer that I had not planned on being on the album at all. I write a lot of songs, and I'm learning how to differentiate between what is like Disarmers and what is like something else that at the time I hadn't really figured out what it was. I just knew I didn't really think it was good for that. But we had been rehearsing for the album, and the last rehearsal that we had before we flew out to LA to make the record, we finished early. Everyone was in really high spirits, and the guys said, do you have anything else that we could just run through? Like, we're here, we're done early, like let's just like blow off some steam and try something new. And I said, well, actually I do. I've got this song called I Got This, and this song called Been Loving You Too Long. And so we ran through them a couple times, and like it felt right. And something that I did not anticipate being a good fit for the Disarmers. It was just like, actually this is a no-brainer. And they were like, we gotta put these on the album.
Wow, that's incredible, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, does it feel like that the I don't know, in a way, your sort of relationship with the Disarmers, plus also the music that you're writing, and the inspirations that you're taking is a sort of reflection of your identity evolving as well over time?
Possibly. I mean, I feel like if I sit down and I listened to Sidelong Years and Nightroamer back to back, there's definitely that evolution of sound. And for me, one of the things that I am very insistent about for myself is, if you want to become a better songwriter and you want to become a better artist, you have to become a better person. Those things go hand in hand, because if art comes out of who we are, then the more we work on ourselves and get to better places of clarity, like that is reflected in the art that you create. So if I were to do that and listen to those albums back to back, I feel like there would be a palpable sense of growth and self-awareness and sort of coming into myself. And you know, there are people like as anticipated, like there are people that are just like, you know, it sucks that there's like a pop song on the album, and it's just like, I mean, you can't please everybody, and
Absolutely.
I don't make music to try to please everybody. I play music that I write songs that I feel good about. I bring them to a band that I also feel good about, and like the combination of me and the musicians that I play music with, like those dudes are like my family. And we want to play stuff that like makes us happy and makes us feel good, and
absolutely,
that we feel like we can come into our power. And so yeah, like that to me is what matters.
I really like that sort of approach, and you know, about you know, you can't please everybody. And you, like, over, you know, when I was younger, for many years, I felt, you know, like generally in my life, like I spent a lot of my time and energy wondering what other people would think about things. You know, stuff that I would do was like, almost like you before you do anything, I have an eye on, or and it's what will they think about that? And it's ridiculous. It's such a waste of energy, because you can't please everybody, and often the people that you're trying to please have no bearing on your life whatsoever. We
Absolutely.
Throw our energy into this. It's crazy. So I'm really pleased that you're doing that. That's fantastic.
Yeah. It seems to be, you know, it's a growing issue, and I think that social media is partly to blame, because everyone is now given this platform. And it's frustrating because I see so much nastiness and mean-spiritedness in adults. You know what I mean? It's like when you see people like in the comment section or like in these forums, just the entire vibe of their comment, it's like you can feel the misery and the judgment. And it's just like, look, everyone is entitled to their opinion, but that doesn't mean, you know, I grew up with a Southern mom, so like, you know, if you can't say nothing nice, don't say anything at all. Like like that, I grew up hearing that my whole life.
There are some mantras from your childhood that you're keeping.
Which, you know, including I need this shit like I need another hole in the head, which was what my dad used to say when he sat down at the end of the month to pay bills.
Oh my, that's fantastic. With I mean, actually related to that, so with that that sort of thought of, you know, doing stuff that you know may not sort of please everybody, how do you sort of manage your own you know, kind of self-belief, you know, and sort of you know confidence in what you're doing? Are you sort of supremely confident in what you're doing, or do you suffer from, you know, bouts of self-doubt? And
I am confident, but I'm not cocky. And by that I mean, I feel like I am, as long as I am doing my absolute best, then that's all I can do. But taking that and coupling it with the knowledge that I am going to make mistakes sometimes. And sometimes I'm going to look back on a song or an album that I did and be like, I could have done that better. But that's just a sign of growth. And to me, that is so important. Like, it's okay to make mistakes, as long as the idea is to get better. The idea is not to be perfect. I don't want to make a perfect song. I don't want to make a perfect album. I want to do the absolute best that I can and work really hard to bring something awesome out.
I think that's a good one. That's a good way to look at it. It's for me, it's like sometimes hard to do that. And I suppose it is a kind of hard thing. I mean, I suppose naturally we want to do things the best that we can, and you know, not having regrets about things, or wish I'd done that differently, because ultimately when you I always think that you try, when you do something at a particular time, you're trying to do your best at that time, and like you say, I think that's a really good point, that when you look back at it, it's a sign of your growth, or how you've changed. You know, if you think, oh, I would have done that a little bit differently, but that's you now, not 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, exactly. I've been sober for a little over 2.5 years now. And one of the questions I get asked a lot by fans is, are you still singing your drinking songs?
Yeah.
And I can't speak for any other artist that's in recovery, but for myself, I'm still singing those songs. It's, those songs were written at a point in my life where alcohol was the only coping mechanism I had.
Yeah.
So for better or worse, it's like, if I didn't have alcohol at the time, who knows what would have happened to me or where I would have ended up. Anytime that I'm talking about sobriety or recovery, I preface it with just, I don't think everybody needs to quit drinking. I needed to quit drinking. And that's not, that doesn't have any bearing on what anyone else does. If I didn't quit drinking, I was going to die. I was killing myself with the amount of whiskey I was drinking every night. It was nuts.
Yeah. And as that, in terms of you, your self-awareness, and as that, as quitting sort of helped that.
Absolutely. I did a lot of research before I quit drinking on alcohol cessation. Yeah. And I knew I tried to quit a couple times before this final time. And I knew that if I was going to be successful at quitting drinking, I would have to approach it from a psychological point of view. Yeah. And knowing that there is, chemical dependency and there are biological factors involved that need to be considered. But ultimately, it is a brain game. Yeah. And I was like, I have to work on changing the way that I perceive alcohol and the way that I perceive what alcohol is doing for me. Because right now I'm telling myself that it's fun, that it helps me with my social anxiety, that it helps me with my depression. And while those things may be like Band-Aid fixes in the moment after the first shot or two where you're relaxed and you feel uninhibited, if you're doing that every night and you're drinking way, way more than that, it's whatever positive effect you thought was you were achieving is completely eradicated.
Yeah. I'm the same, about 2 years. And on a previous episode, somebody asked me, because we were talking about gut instinct, how much you sort of trust. Do you trust your gut instinct? Much more now. They can sort of almost like that, more sort of confidence in yourself.
Yeah, you're rebuilding your ability to trust yourself with the decisions that you're making.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that what about in terms of sort of mindset about working with other musicians, collaborations, and how do you feel about that? Have you done other sort of collaborations?
No. My manager has brought a few requests to me, and at some point, perhaps it will feel like the right thing, but I songwriting for me is not by its nature, songwriting for me is not something that I do because I want to further my career, or you know what I mean? It's something that I do because it saves my life every time. So it's not like, oh, fun, let's sit down and spend 6 hours writing a song together. It's just not my process.
Just not your process.
My process is I go through life and my subconscious collects things, and then at some point, bam, everything gets lined up and I write an entire song, typically in less than 30 minutes, and that's everything. That's lyrics, it's melody, it's chord, everything. And it very much is that feeling of the muse descending, because it just all hits at the same time and it's just there.
Wow, that's fascinating. That really is.
So I don't know how to how I would be able to like capture that with another writer.
Yeah.
And I'm open to the idea, but for now it's just like what we do is so singular with the Disarmers. And there's collaboration within the Disarmers as far as when I write a song, it's the entire song, and then I write like a loose arrangement so that I have some kind of structure to bring it to the band. But together, like in a room, all of us finalize the arrangement, and we make little changes here and there. And everyone who has an idea, every single idea is tried, no matter how weird or far out it is. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But like we're very pro like everybody gets a say, and everybody gets to like, we all get to like try different things. And I think it's really healthy, and it keeps us all happy.
It's interesting you say that, because I mean that one of the things I was going to mention was about our language. I guess sometimes the words that we use now, some words have sort of been hijacked, and started to mean other things. And I think politicians and different movements are sort of very good at taking these words, and then suddenly, before you know it, sometimes it's like, hang on a second, didn't it used to mean this? And I was just going to mention democracy is one of those that it's kind of, to me, it sort of shifted its meaning like to something that it really shouldn't be. But what you were just describing then, as far as the kind of Disarmers is going, it's like, okay, well, all ideas welcome, let's throw everything in, and then just see how it kind of goes.
And it's also kind of the difference between equality and equity. Like when we talk about equality in America, like people just think, well, everybody has the exact same thing. That's what equality means. But it's a lot more complex than that. Equality is like people have different needs. So true equality would be like everyone's needs being met, no matter how vastly different they are. And in this case with the Disarmers, it isn't pure democracy in the sense that like if it was like in the truest sense of the word, maybe everyone would get to like write a line of the song, you know what I mean? But it's like, here's this sort of like half finished product, and let's all come together and make it the best that it can be.
I mean on that, I mean, talk about sort of social media, go back to sort of social media, and then this, ideas of sort of social justice. And I know that you sort of posted things recently around, kind of racism, for example. And I've always sort of been, I like my background of music I've enjoyed. I grew up with sort of punk rock, when, as far as, and the thing that always spoke to me was the lyrical, sort of content, and some of the real kind of meat, what it meant around, in fact, I think it was sort of Joe Strummer's words, kind of like exemplary manners to your fellow human beings. And that to me sort of speaks justice, it speaks equity and equality. And the sort of the lyrics that you're writing is very sort of personal, but very sort of strong sense of kind of social justice in there as well, which for me really sort of resonates with me.
Typically my songs are based on my experience. I think I've delved a little bit into more of the storytelling aspect a few times. But our song, What It Takes, is about racial equality and LGBTQ rights. And, it doesn't come right out and use those phrases. But it's interesting because one of the disadvantages of growing up the way that I grew up was I have had to learn so much in the last 10 years that most people kind of know and take for granted.
True. Yeah.
In addition to just like discovering myself and realizing that like it's okay to like be who I am.
Yeah.
I'm also like coming from a very sheltered place. Like I didn't know anything about structural racism.
Yeah.
I didn't know about like how I mean I grew up in a household where it would not have been wise for me to come out as bi, so I didn't until when I was close to 20. But I didn't realize that the GOP in America is as actively after. It's just like, what threat do I pose to you because I'm a bi woman? You know what I mean? Like it's insane. But I've had to learn about a lot of these issues in real time. So I feel like all I can do is, as I'm educating myself about these things and as new information is coming to light for me, to try to listen and be supportive, and very much intersectional. I think that, when we talk about racism and sexism and homophobia and ableism, like all of these things, like we have to take our other minority groups into account. Like we have to stick together. Like there's no other option.
It's interesting. There's a book by an author, Bernardino Evaristo, which is called "Why I'm Not Talking to White People About Race Anymore." She gave an example of she was at a conference or a seminar or something around gender equality, and Bernardino sort of brought up to the lady that she was talking to about well, of course, for sort of Black women, the issues are even more amplified. Someone just did not understand that. It's like, well, that can't be the case. No, that's totally dismissive.
Yeah,
and like you say, that sort of intersectionality is like sort of so important. And again, going back to that point, what we started with about that sort of empathy and understanding things from somebody else's perspective, not shutting down their experiences because you haven't lived them. They have lived them, they've experienced that, but there is so much of that that's not understood, or I don't profess to understand anything, but just having that empathy and that awareness to see something from somebody else's point of view. We have to start doing that more.
And that ties right back into how this whole conversation started, talking about emotional intelligence.
Absolutely.
I feel like people are just in general so damaged. Like there's just so much going on in our emotional and our mental lives. That a lot of people have this sort of chip on their shoulder. So if you start talking to a white person that feels that way about racial inequality, it triggers their defense system, and they're just like, but what about all the stuff that I have to deal with? Which in a way, like, I understand why people respond that way.
Absolutely.
But it's like we have to realize that like these things are not like mutually exclusive. Like you can have a hard time with this or that. You can have struggles, but that doesn't mean that other people don't have struggles that are specific to their situation.
Absolutely.
And trying to, be self-aware and constantly, monitoring your emotions and your attitudes and your beliefs about things. We have a really long way to go as a species.
Well, you're leading the way, Sarah. You're leading the way with this. That's the important thing. No, it's funny, isn't it? Because you think that we have a long way to go, and it feels sometimes like there's sort of insurmountable obstacles, and sort of like how where do you sort of focus your energy? But we'll do our own bit, and that's important.
When you care about this stuff, and it just seems like the entire world is falling apart and everything is just absolutely bonkers. I struggle with this a lot because I do get overwhelmed, and like my tendency when I get overwhelmed is to just like shut down and be like, oh my God, I can't function because I don't know where to focus.
Yeah.
Like if I have something to focus on, if there is a clear directive, I'm golden. That's, I'm in my zone, and that's where I thrive.
Yeah.
But if it feels like it's just like there's so many things in so many different areas, and you don't know how to prioritize, or you don't know how to organize the information that's coming in. What I've been discovering the last couple of weeks is, especially in light of like current world events, is there are times where you can't do anything as far as addressing a specific situation that's occurring.
Yeah.
And when you feel like you're being bombarded and you are self-aware enough to realize you're on the cusp of shutting down because you don't know how to handle it, to turn inward and to focus on yourself, which not everybody believes this, but to me, I definitely believe in the interconnectedness of all things. And so I feel like if I can work on myself today, and I can meditate today, and I can maybe give an encouraging word to somebody, and if that's all I can do, that's enough.
Absolutely.
And every little bit of work that we can do on ourselves to sort of put us in the right direction of growth and compassion and empathy, that's all we can do. And it's really encouraging to know, because I feel like if you are a very empathetic person, it can feel very lonely. But I feel like it's important to bear in mind that there are all kinds of people out there who are every bit as introverted as you, and who are struggling every bit as much as you're struggling with how overwhelming life can be sometimes. And we're all trying to be better people and be better at listening and more compassionate and more empathetic. And sometimes that's all you can do. Sometimes you can do a lot more, and those are great times.
I completely agree with you. Sometimes, I mean, I don't know whether like we've been brought up thinking that, with this sort of definition of what it means to be productive or to sort of achieve things, it's almost like you need to see sort of tangible things. But quite often it's the intangible things that are the ones that we don't, the ones that we don't see. Like you said, just sort of having that sort of empathy, and just sort of, just a few words to somebody who you can see is in difficulty. It's just so important. But we don't always see any immediate result.
Yeah, because that's what we're looking for. Yeah, we're looking for like instant results and like something palpable that you can observe. And sometimes life doesn't work that way, and that's okay. Yeah.
Sarah, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely wonderful, really wonderful. There's a ton more stuff I'm sure that we could sort of, in fact, I know there's a ton more stuff that we could talk about. I think this is brilliant. So thanks so much for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the show, and I really hope that you enjoyed it and that you'll tune in for the next episode. In the meantime, it would be really awesome if you could rate and review the show, and also share it with any friends who you think might enjoy it.